So hi everyone, thank you for joining us today for our webinar on respecting and responding to the needs of communities of color in the research space with Dr. Rashida Chandler, who we'll introduce in a second. Just to help you navigate the GoToWebinar, you'll see in the top right-hand corner of your screen, there's an orange box with a white arrow. If you click on the white arrow, it will open the menu. So feel free to type in a question at any time in the question area. We'll be taking questions at the end though. Also, we've included today's PowerPoint handout in the handout section, so you should be able to download that. Everyone is on mute just for noise considerations, but we are recording this, so you'll get the recording probably next week, early next week too. So with that, I will start the presentation. So first, just introductions. My name is Stacy Penna. I'm the NVivo Community Director here at QSR. And I will talk a little bit more about the community at the end and how you can get involved. But I've been lucky enough to be collaborating with Ali from Sage Publications on these webinar series. So I just wanted to introduce Ali.
Hi everyone, and thanks Stacy. I'm Ali Owen and I'm the commissioning editor for Research Methods Books based out of Sage's London office, and I work on all things research methods across the social sciences and have equally enjoyed working with Stacy and the rest of the contributors to this series.
Great, thank you. And now for our presenter, Dr. Rashida Chandler, and she's an assistant professor at Emory University's School of Nursing. Dr. Chandler also holds a visiting professorship at University of California, San Francisco. Her professional contributions have impacted health disparities in minority communities through research, pedagogy, and clinical practices. So welcome, Dr. Chandler.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Sorry, and I'll make you presenter now.
Wonderful. So bear with me all. Okay. And okay, can you confirm that you see just the presentation?
Yes, I just see your PowerPoint. It's perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to Sage and NVivo for inviting me as a presenter. I am excited about the topic, and I hope today to be able to provide more practical ways to engage with communities of color, as opposed to kind of our standard presentation. I'd like to kind of make it a little bit more fun and humanize it a little bit so that it's something that you could implement day to day. So welcome to my practical presentation regarding how we in the research space should be respectful and responsive to the needs of communities of color. Again, my name is Rashida Chandler, and in addition to being a researcher and academician at Emory University in the School of Nursing, I also practice as a clinician in a community clinic in the Metro Atlanta area. So just a little bit about what I intend to present on. I'll give you a little bit of an outline here. The first thing you'll notice is that throughout my presentation, there will be glimpses inside communities. So you'll see some of the issues that kind of plague communities of color that you need to be considering when you approach communities of color for research, excuse me. Secondly, I would like for us to learn how to assess the community and their needs. Next, I hope to give you some tools on how to approach and lead studies in communities of color. And then lastly, I will give you my final thoughts. So we're going to start out with a glimpse inside communities. And my presentation will be about how we should consider communities in the context of social experiences, diversity within those communities, and most importantly, as human beings. I never thought that I would need to explain the importance of humanity and respectful approaches to communities, but that is the world that we live in. This presentation is riddled with questions that will require you to think, one, how you might respond to systemic inequities and disparities that hinge on the social issue of race. And two, I will try to give suggestions based on my experience to help you approach communities of color with humility and with authentic concern for pursuing optimal community outcomes. So the two questions right now I'd like for you to consider is, what if you heard this news that I'm about to share with you almost every day impacting people who look like you? And how trusting would you be of outsiders if this were the case for you? So if you would indulge me for a moment and listen to this real case that was just sent to me yesterday from my colleague at Emory University. She's a faculty there, and she shared this with myself and others about her son's recent experience on Tuesday with law enforcement. And she did give me permission to share. So this is Dr. Shaquita Starks, and she writes to the Alabama Police Department. I am writing you about an altercation between the State Patrol officers in Alabama and my son Tyson and his godbrother Aaron. They were stopped by an officer today at approximately 12:55. We do not have the names, but I have provided you with a screenshot of the officer. First, the officer approached the passenger side, asked my son for his license and registration, and asked for the passenger's ID. Traffic stops typically occur as a result of suspected moving violations and don't typically ask for the passenger's ID. The following is a short conversation between the officer and my son regarding the rationale for the stop that was transcribed from a video recording. The officer asked, "Where y'all folks headed to?" Tyson and Aaron answered, "Memphis, Tennessee." After getting my son and the passenger's information, he told them the reason for stopping. He said, "I pulled you over for a couple of reasons. The first reason is way back, you ran up on my bumper a time or two, and now you got stuff hanging from your rear view mirror. You can't have anything hanging from your rear view mirror in the state of Alabama, okay?" The officer reapproached my son's vehicle after checking his license. He asked my son for insurance, and then I heard the officer tell my son to put the phone away. And he was also, he said that he needed to search the car. My son asked if he had a warrant, and the officer said he did not need a warrant because he had these canines. I had told my son to keep me on speaker, and I then spoke up. I first asked the officer the initial reason for stopping my son, and also the basis for telling him he needed to search the car. He responded to me that there had been questionable activity between Georgia and Memphis, and that they wanted to just do a check of the car. My son is a freshman in college, no record, and is a highly respectful child. My son is extremely traumatized, and he's now terrified. Your officers violated all of my son's rights as a legal citizen of the United States. And so that was Shaquita's recent encounter with regard to her son and law enforcement. And these are some of the quotes that she provided when we were talking about this situation. So Shaquita's description to us, her colleagues, regarding this event, she said, "Thanks so much for reaching out about my son yesterday. Was the scariest day I've ever lived. He is traumatized, scared to drive now, and has been in a depressed mood all day. He told me today, 'Ma, I realize this is just going to happen for me because I'm a Black man. That's reality.' I cried. I have been crying all day. He is 18 years old. He is in college. Why does he have to experience this? So many Black men have inboxed me with their scary traffic stop story. It is just freaking tragic." So when I asked Shaquita if I could share her story, she said to me, "They need to know it ain't just happening in the so-called hood." So I just wanted to share some reflections of community experiences, because I think it helps us to understand when we're going into these communities and asking them to engage with us on research projects, that there's a lot of mistrust or issues that have traumatized them, and we need to be considerate of that. So now I would like for you to reflect. When I hear this story, and this is my reflection, I think about my 7-year-old son who might one day encounter this same fate. As a researcher, you need to understand the social climate and acknowledge why communities might be mistrusting. You will be required to present yourself as an ally and advocate for improving the well-being of the community that you want something from. You must be this relationship must be reciprocal. You get something and the community gets something in return. You might ask, what is that something? And I say to you, let the community tell you what that something is. We will now discuss ways of that you can assess the needs of your community. But first, I'd like for you to reflect, and we have a poll question that if you would respond to. After this experience, how trusting would you be of researchers who might trigger this trauma? So I think Stacy's going to put that poll up for us.
Yes, I just did. If people
Thank you.
don't mind, people are doing the poll right now, and I'll share the results with everyone after.
Fantastic.
Okay, I'm just going to give people a little bit more time to put their vote in, and then I'll close the poll. So I'm going to close the poll now, and I'll share it so everyone should be able to see it. So it looks like very trusting 1%, somewhat trusting 11%, minimally trusting 56%, and not trusting at all at 32%.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for participating in that poll. And so now that you heard the scenario and that you've been polled, you can probably relate to and understand why certain communities may be a bit off. You know, they may not be as welcoming initially, but we'll talk about ways to work on that relationship so that you can have access to the community. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about how to assess your community. This is a more traditional and formal way to determine the needs of the community. And you can employ the tools such as the SWOT analysis. SWOT appeals to me because the initial consideration is the strengths of a community. If you, the researcher, approach a community of color honoring that they do have positive qualities, they are resilient, they already have strategies that could enhance your work, then you can leverage those strengths to foster a relationship with the community and partner with them and capitalize on the opportunities to address their needs or weaknesses or systemic barriers or threats to that community. And so here's my practical example. I told you before that I do work for a community agency called the Center for Black Women's Wellness. It is located on the west side of Atlanta, and it's been in existence for over 30 years. It's a nonprofit organization. So the strength of CBWW to me is that it's community-based. It has a family service center with a mission of improving the health and well-being of underserved Black women and families. And they offer a number of services that address issues for low cost and no cost healthcare services. And they touch about 3,500 women annually. They have several programs, which is the wellness program, which I'm most affiliated with, where we provide preventive healthcare service. We also sometimes manage some of the chronic illnesses that come into our office. They also do community breast health initiatives where we monitor and assess breast health in our women and make sure that they get to the proper screening and also are referred to the proper places if they need additional care. We also have a maternal and child health initiative that we work with mothers and their babies and try and improve health outcomes in that population. And we also have a fatherhood program where we try to encourage that engagement with fathers. And then we also have a women's economic self-sufficiency program where we're teaching women how to be self-employed or own their own businesses and learn how to govern their income and finances. Some of the needs or weaknesses of CBWW is that this agency is totally dependent or primarily dependent on grant funding. And so I would say that we need to increase fundraising and tap into philanthropic donors. Some of the opportunities are that we do partner with other institutions. For instance, we preceptor students from different schools of nursing and medical students. We also partner with local colleges, and particularly historically Black colleges and universities. And so there are opportunities there to expand services and also have additional clinical support. And then for a nonprofit, unfortunately, the threats can always be closure. We've been thriving for some time now, and so I'm hopeful that that will not happen. So as both a researcher and clinician in this organization, we are constantly working to fortify the strengths and mitigate the weaknesses and threats. We also analyze biannually to see where we are on our goals, and now we will consider the community assessment tool. So that's another way to assess your community. So what I would say is the community assessment tool is your due diligence as the researcher or the leader. You have to realize that there are often times when engaging with the community that you will also be co-leading with members of the community and key stakeholders. So we'll look at the assessment portion, and that's basically that you determine the needs of the community. So you can get that from some epidemiological data, and you can also ask community members and stakeholders themselves what their needs are. Then we go to the policy development portion of this. And we know that policies and laws govern our lives, and we have to be sensitive to any inequities that are impacting the community we are interested in partnering with. So we can't expect community members to compartmentalize engaging with our study from the daily challenges that they face in society, which could also be factors that we need to consider for our work. When you approach communities of color, you need to be prepared to advocate in the policy realm to invoke meaningful change. As far as assurance, this is to give back as much as possible, and that means you, not just your research assistants, not just your community engagement personnel, but you have a presence in the community that you want to serve. Okay, let's take a breath. I've given you quite a bit of information so far, and so I'll let you digest it. But in this instance, I want you to think about leadership in this space, right? So I want to take a moment and consider leadership. I refer to you as the leader, but you need to also determine who in the community that you want to influence is the leaders from your perspective. Is it just you? Is it community stakeholders? Is there shared leadership that will occur throughout the duration of the project? And my answer is that it is likely the latter. And for me, it has been the latter. You will lead in certain aspects of the project due to your skill set, and the community members and stakeholders will lead in others. So let's reflect again. Here's another glimpse inside communities. And I want to share two experiences, one from a Mexican immigrant and one that is personal and significant to me from a colleague that I work on so many projects with. So the first story is about Josephina, and she's 51. This is her story. I was very poor with my 4 kids and my abusive husband, and we all lived in Mexico. My house was made of cardboard brick. It was a very small house with 1 electric stove and 2 beds. I would work as a servant at a house in the rich part of the city, and on the weekends, I would sell tamales. A way I survived was when people would give me used clothes and free food because I needed it for my kids. We left Tijuana and we started to walk late at night in the desert. The weather was very cold at night, and in the day it was very hot. I had very little food with me, so me and my daughter had to eat very little, and it was hard. Also, with water, I had to take little sips of water with my daughter. That was the most difficult part of the trip. When we were almost at Los Angeles, I couldn't feel my legs, so I looked down and I saw my legs swollen and were turning purple. Also, my hands were swollen and I couldn't feel them because my blood circulation was not going the right way. I arrived 4th of July at Los Angeles. We ate and they let us take a shower, and we were in a basement. And there was a little window and we saw fireworks. And I asked the lady that let us stay in her house, and she said that it was Independence Day. I went to find my brother's house, and they were surprised to see us because we had made it. It was really hard to get used to life in America because no one wanted to give me a job. I left Mexico because my husband would hit me really bad, and also because I needed money. When I went to America, I brought 3 of my children, 2 girls and 1 boy, but I did not have enough money to take all of them. And to this day, I am sad that I didn't take all my kids with me. On July 4th, me and my daughter will be 18 years old in the United States, and I will never regret coming here. I was able to find a job to help my kids and a better life without abuse. I am proud of some Americans who help people in need like myself. Yeah, I'll take a moment to just think about that. Um, Natalie Hernandez is an assistant professor at Morehouse School of Medicine. She is a proud Puerto Rican, and she will let you know that. Um, she had a quote, and I texted her yesterday. I said, "Can I use your quote? Because I think it's so compelling." But one of the things she said was, when trying to buy a home in a certain community, my partner and I were denied a loan 3 times until our agent checked that we were white. Then immediately we were approved. And so I just want you again to think about the issues and circumstances that different communities have to endure as you approach them to engage in your research. We have a brief commercial break, but it's about systemic racism. So we will, it's about a minute. So again, indulge me. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm just, to do the video, I'm going to make myself presenter and then I will start it.
Okay.
Okay, so hopefully everyone could hear that because that was new for me. And I'm going, Rashid, I'm going to make you presenter again.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, I think we're back on track here. And I hope, you can appreciate some of the small clips and different dynamics of the presentation to bring home the message here. So I'm going to just share a quote with you from Margaret Wheatley. There is no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about. And so this quote to me means that you need to determine what the community cares about. So in conjunction with your interest and the data, what does your community value and how can that be integrated into your work? One of the points I want to make is that leaders listen. So if you plan to engage communities of color, particularly now, listening will be essential to your success. To append to that notion of leaders listening, I have a diagram here on the structural inequalities and biases, social, economic, and political drivers. And ultimately, our goal for conducting research is for it to be translational with favorable outcomes and sustainable, right? So if that is our mission, we must take a more holistic approach to the way that we implement studies. Here in the US, for instance, there are a number of federal grants that are now considering these issues. For example, a recent call was entitled Understanding and Addressing the Impact of Structural Racism and Discrimination on Minority Health and Health Disparities. So we're getting to points where we're not able to just avoid some of these major issues in communities of color. Things you should know displayed by the structural inequalities and biases, social, economic, and political drivers model is that one, the focus is making health equity a shared vision and value, increasing community capacity to shape outcomes, fostering multi-sector collaborations. And for example, I am working in a very multidisciplinary team that include computer scientists, social workers, data analysis experts, public health experts, community advisory board members. And we do that to ensure that we respond to the needs of our community. To do this type of work, we have to consider the social determinants of health listed here in the diagram. And another key point is that we have to dispel personal biases. So your personal biases can impact how you are received and perceived by the community. I always say that communities of color are very sensitive to disingenuous individuals. So be your authentic self and be honest about your limitations. If you don't know customs of that community, remain teachable and ask to be taught. Most communities respect that so much more than you being a pretender. So a quick story about myself. I remember that I visited LA about a few summers ago. And because my son is in a language immersion school, I know a few greetings in Mandarin. We took a cab and we had an older Asian gentleman as our cab driver who only spoke Mandarin. When I said ni hao, his face lit up. Now that was close to all I knew in the language, but it meant so much to him that I tried. And so I would urge you to try. Okay, so we have one more quick clip that Stacey's gonna do, and then I'll stop torturing her.
No, it's good. I learned something new today, how to do the videos. All right, so I'm just going to do this one.
I do quite like them. They add a different element to the presentation, like you were saying, Rashida. I think it works well.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so I'll make you presenter again, Rashida.
Okay. All right. I think we're all set.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to keep going with some of the qualities of leaders in this research space when dealing with communities of color. One of the things I mentioned that I wanted to share some tips and suggestions for how to build community relationships and partnerships and increase your visibility in the community. One, by attending community events, and I gave an example earlier about one of the initiatives for CBWW is breast awareness and screening and prevention options. So we do a lot of health fairs, and I make it my business to at least attend several during the year in order for the community to also see my face and know who I am. In addition to coming into the clinic as one of their providers. So I just want them to know that I have an interest in the community as a whole being healthy. Volunteering, I think that again goes with attending the community events, but sometimes you may not necessarily be involved in the work of that particular event, but just being present can help, or you can volunteer and actually do the work. Then identify key stakeholders. So there are a lot of times community leaders. I know there's a kind of a gravitation a lot of times in the Black community toward churches and pastors, but there are also other types of key stakeholders, could be nonprofit organization leaders, etc. And then just be authentic. And I think that speaks for itself. Just be who you are. And if you don't know something, again, be teachable and ask. So this is our second poll question, and I'd like for you to reflect. And the question is, how comfortable do you feel engaging the community of color you are interested in serving? And that means attending events in that community, volunteering in that community, just having a presence in that community. So here we go with the poll question.
Let's give people a couple more seconds to vote. Okay, I'm going to close it now, and I'll share it. So it looks like 46% of people polled said very comfortable, 43% somewhat comfortable, 11% minimally comfortable, and 0 not comfortable at all.
I'm happy that it's 0 not comfortable at all. Because I might give you some different advice about thinking about engaging with a certain community that you're not at all comfortable with. But it's great that you at least are open to, or for the most part, it seems pretty comfortable with your community of interest. So great to hear. Another reflection, and this one is particularly, it's kind of what we're used to, statistics, but I just wanted to make sure to highlight the Native American community here in the States. This is a poll on percentage of Native Americans who who say they have been personally discriminated against because they are Native when they interact with police, they apply for jobs, they're being paid equally or considered for promotions, trying to vote or participate in politics, and that's when compared to individuals who live in the actual majority Native areas versus those who live in non-majority Native areas. So this reflection is to bring light to many of the issues that various communities face. One of the other things is that leaders labor. And so I try to keep some of these topics really short and memorable so that you don't have to, try and remember a paragraph, but a couple of words to just put in your memory bank about what would be helpful for you to facilitate your research in these communities. And ultimately, I'm compelling you to participate in the work. So leaders have a presence in the community. And it is okay to have representation like research assistants, etc. I have those too, but I also engage with individuals in the community as well. So you should not be doing research with communities that you are afraid of or you're uninterested in engaging with. And so I'm very, again, very happy to see that in the poll that you guys do feel comfortable with the community that you're trying to engage with. Leaders plan, and we do have to delegate somewhere. Sometimes we can't be everywhere, but again, just having that presence is important. Leaders lionize, and so lionize means celebrate, and we do want to celebrate our communities because again, they do have strengths and they have qualities that they bring to the work that could be very, very, very helpful and essential to the outcomes. So we want to provide communities with encouragement. We want to, again, evaluate the strengths of the community partners and delegate and assign tasks that capitalize on their strengths. They can be a part of the work. I am very, very engaged with community participatory research, so I guess that's why I emphasize that so much. But it's a key cornerstone to our work, and it's been very fruitful because there's investment and communities feel like they have ownership of the work as well. I would add here, gratitude. Obviously, a lot of times we do incentivize our communities, and we know that there are regulatory bodies that help to prevent coercion. So I think that speaks for itself. But I would say that we should avoid community negativism, and by that I mean consider how you disseminate your outcomes. So think about language that you use when describing the community. I would say balance some of the weakness or needs of that community with their strengths. So, kind of come from a strengths-based approach when describing that community. Give community stakeholders opportunities to publish with you. We've done that a lot lately. That way, representatives from the community is proofing the content and can alert you to unfavorable language. Those are great suggestions for you to consider. Again, leaders lend, and I think this is just indicative of all of the comments that were made previously. You have to lend of your time, your talent, and sometimes your resources in order to get the work done. So we're asking communities to sacrifice and do the work with us. So we're also expected to do some sacrificing. Just a quote here from the late Representative Elijah Cummings. Our decisions about transportation determine much more than where roads or bridges or tunnels or rail lines will be built. They determine the connections and barriers that people will encounter in their daily lives, and thus how hard or easy it will be for people to get where they need to go and want to go. So this quote can be taken literally and metaphorically. And as leaders, let's reduce the barriers. Leaders are logical. So, we know that we have to make decisions and we have to try and do those objectively, particularly when dealing with communities of color. We don't want to come across like we're showing any type of partiality or favoritism, so we just have to remain objective in our approaches. And then always, again, being self-reflective and checking our personal biases before they can be offensive to the community. Community collaboration is essential, and so we want to establish meaningful community relationships and partnerships. And I thought the best way to exemplify that is just to give you a brief snapshot of one of the projects that I'm working on with the community of color. It's Black women. The purpose of the study was for us to understand cisgender Black women's preferences for a functionality, format, and design of a mobile HIV prevention app. and to examine their willingness to actually use this app. And we also wanted to examine their willingness to use an app overall for this topic of HIV prevention. So what we did was we had prototypes developed. It was a pitch, what we call the pitch, and I was the client. I went to Spelman University in an undergraduate mHealth class and gave a general overview of the problem and content that needed to be included in a mobile app. And mind you, we had done some formative work prior to even getting to this stage. And so based on our previous work, that's how we were able to formulate kind of the information that needed to go to the tech developers. And I did also encourage these students to be creative with app features and to think of relevant content that they themselves as Black women would want in something, an app like this. So the product, basically, there were 9 groups of about 3 to 4 Black college women who created mobile app wireframes, or kind of a prototype that can be clicked on, but it's not functional. You can't download it. They all had an opportunity to present this to us, to experts, to instructors, and to their peers. And so after this particular course, and I was able to get the wireframes, then we did focus groups with women in the community to get their feedback on this app prototype. And so how we engage with the community, I'm very fortunate again to work with Center for Black Women's Wellness, but I do work with a lot of nonprofit organizations, both within Atlanta and in rural areas. But this particular project right now is with Center for Black Women's Wellness. And we also did recruit some students out of Emory. And then we did like flyer distribution, kind of online engagement with individuals to recruit. And so I'll just briefly talk about some of the things that emerged from this project. Our women wanted to get reliable digital dialogue, and it all ties into listening to your community. They wanted personalized messaging. They wanted to get information that if they put something into the app, it's kind of like if they put something into your study, they want to get something meaningful out of it. So they want feedback that's meaningful to them. Some of the other desires for this app was that they could actually order some things such as condoms or maybe home testing, so convenient consumerism. And some other kind of key points was that the app would be customizable. So many of us like to adjust things to our preferences, so appearance. And also tell me where, get me there, which was like GPS types of things. Where can they find HIV testing and PrEP sites, reproductive health centers? They wanted the images to look like them with the diversity and array of skin complexions and body types. And then, of course, they wanted the app to be secure. So that's an example of how we, in our entire project, really involved the community. So what is your access? Like, how do you access your community? And so, you know, in different places that will vary. But what I'll say here is that it's very important a lot of times especially for communities of color, that you have a level, again, of visibility in order for agencies to really want to partner with you. Qualities of a leader, I think these are kind of straightforward, collaborative. We can't, in many instances now, can't do this work alone. And, you know, it's a lot of team science happening. And I think that's really healthy because different experts bring in different expertise. Being communicative, so just, you know, being transparent, letting your community know, being open and honest with them about the issues that surround research. I can give an example of, you know, the Center for Black Women's Wellness is all about community and making sure women get what they need in the community setting as far as healthcare and resources. So sometimes they're not real clear about all the issues around IRB and incentives being held up because they have to get approved. So you just have to let your community know what's happening. And I think, they're open to that, but you just have to communicate it. Being compassionate, I think that speaks for itself. Having the competence in whatever work you're doing, and then ensuring that the community that you're confident to implement this work. And so I use the novice to expert kind of approach to this. What is the scope of your work? Experience matters and will sometimes dictate your approach. You may be early career and be appending your work to a senior scientist who have established relationships. They can assist you in forging your own partnerships in the space. You may be mid-career, you have gained independence, you have a network, and you are gaining traction in the space. And then you are the expert, and you can now pay it forward by helping others create meaningful community partnerships. I would be remiss not to mention technology, since we are pretty much inundated with technology now. This past year, we have relied heavily on technology, and I would simply say that you should find the balance with technology and respect when community members prefer a more personal touch, when, of course, it is safe for all parties. I am immersed in a tech space with my research now and my work, and I truly have to practice this myself. So I'm speaking from experience, because there are some communities that just want you to be present as well. So just balancing the technology. With regard to your team composition, what I will say is the who matters. Who will you entrust to represent you in the community? An insensitive and unconcerned representative can ruin your relationships with the community. And the how. How will you motivate your team to prioritize the community needs and demonstrate that demonstrate with each interaction your vision and your goals for your research. Here it's evaluating, assess and reassess, and then adjust. So I just say be flexible and willing to adjust as best you can to accommodate the community. Think if you were conducting research with the community in North Carolina where Andrew Brown was killed, or if your research topic was entitled Working Conditions of Asian Women Who Live in Atlanta Before the Spa Shooting, you would need to adjust and put the grief of the community first and re-engage when they are ready. So my final thoughts, and I call this the Quad A Action Plan, engaging with communities of color for research purposes. Consider that societal issues that are unique to each community. So you need to consider those issues and be awareness. Acknowledge that you will be a partner, both giving to and taking from the community. Assure the community that what you take will be used to help improve issues in the community, their health and wellness, structural inequalities, and it will not simply be for professional advancement like a grant and publications, although we need those things. And animate the outcome. Transform your findings into a tangible product for the community, which fosters sustained relationships. So I spent most of this presentation talking about communities of color. However, I imagine that these concepts are general enough to be applicable to other communities like gender nonconforming communities. So we are all human, and I plastered it all over this slide, and want to be treated as such. I want to thank you, and I will turn it over to Stacy for questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Chandler. That was a really insightful and powerful presentation. I'm just going, while people type in their questions, it's in the question area in the menu. And also don't forget, you can download the handout. I'm just going to make myself presenter, and talking about community, I just wanted to share what we're doing in the NVivo community, which is really all about connecting researchers with each other around their work and helping them connect and learn from each other. So In regards to share and learn, we have these webinar series we've been hosting with Sage. I have an NVivo podcast that's all really about the researchers' work and what they do. We do have our NVivo virtual conference coming up. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And ways to connect is we do have an NVivo community online forum. So it's another way to find fellow researchers. So we have a few more webinars in the series coming up. So please feel free to register and join and share them with others. The virtual conference, our call for abstracts is open now until June 30th. So we would love to see your abstracts and have you present at the conference that's in September. And lastly, we have a early career research grant that will be announced in a month or so. And right now, my colleague Silvana, our QSR research director, is looking for reviewers. So if you would like to help us with that, that would be great. You just can contact her, and all this information is in the handout. So with that, I will have Allie ask the first question because we have a few questions.
Sure, thanks, Stacy. So question from Jillian, how do you see the model minority myth affect other minority groups like Asians? What's your experience of Asian researchers engaging with other minority group research participants?
Great question, and thank you for that question, Jillian. I don't have a lot of experience in that space. I do apologize. I do have Asian colleagues, obviously, but I haven't seen that a lot of them necessarily engage with other communities of color with their work from my experience. However, I do have an example of one Asian colleague. She's out in California. Her name's Sherry, and she lived in Mississippi for a while. And she was engaging with Black communities in the South. And she expressed how difficult it was for her because, there were cultural differences. But once again, a lot of the strategies that I mentioned today, she had to employ, like being very present in that community, kind of garnering their trust. And again, I think that that's crossed so many different communities. I don't necessarily think, I'm a Black researcher. I think if I'm interested in doing work with Asian communities, I have to be present, and I may have to do some research. Maybe I have to learn a little bit more Mandarin. Like, I think just showing that you have interest in the culture and concerns of that community is essential. So when it comes to Asian researchers, that's kind of the only example that I have from my personal experience, is that one from Sherry, and she said that eventually she was able to gain the trust of that community, and I think she still does work with them today. So I think it's like anyone, you just want to know people are genuine and want to help your community thrive. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you. And here's a question from Natalie. She said, I love this HCD approach. Is this the app you mentioned, available widely?
Oh, thank you so much. Not yet. So we literally, before I got on this webinar, I had my final session with a group of Georgia Tech students who built out the prototype. So it is going to be functional now, and we're going to pilot it soon. So hopefully it'll be on the market very, very, very soon. So yeah, we're working on it. Thank you.
Sorry, Allie, do you want to ask?
Yes. Sorry, my mouse froze for a second. Okay, so on to the next question. Hello from Canada, and thank you for the presentation. Are there any frameworks for analyses that you would recommend for researchers or consumers of research on Black, Indigenous, and racialized communities to address personal biases and minimize the potential of further oppression? I'm familiar with the QuantKit framework developed by Gilborn, Wormington, and Denmark, and wondered whether there are any other approaches that you might be aware of.
Oh, that's a great question. I I mean, I tried to give you a couple of frameworks that we've actually used. I mean, we're so immersed in, again, the HCD, human-centered design, because a lot of my projects right now are so tech heavy. Those are kind of the frameworks lately that we've been leaning on. I can't think of anything offhand per se that in addition to that, and I do apologize. I'm happy to share them, after this presentation. You can feel free to email me, and I can certainly do a little bit of looking in that regard. I'm happy to do that.
So here's a question from Carrie. Thank you very much for this presentation. It's giving me a lot to think about and plan for. A lot of what you're talking about seems to be most appropriate for communities which are geographically close. What
Mhm.
suggestions would you have for working with communities which are geographically distant, maybe
Mm,
organized around an experience or illness?
wow. That's a great question, and I hate to just indicate technology, because I think we're all kind of getting a little burnout with it. But obviously that is an option. I know there's a lot of ways to engage groups in a technological space, as far as Zoom or Facebook groups, etc. The other thing I was thinking is, and again, it's maybe not feasible or affordable sometimes, but maybe occasionally, biannually, creating some kind of a meeting place for individuals who have special needs, or if it's a community that's kind of spread out. We are dealing with one of our studies, we're dealing with places that are in rural settings. So they tend to be, they're definitely a couple of hours away from us, but we're going to make the sacrifice. So again, I think it's helpful to have that team approach, because you don't necessarily have to do it all, and you can share the load of maybe some of the travel. So from that perspective, where you might have to travel a couple of hours away from your the place that you reside, you rotate having that visibility with your team between individuals on the team. So maybe I go this month, and then my partner, one of my investigators might go next month. So just kind of rotating the obligation to be present. That's another strategy, so that you have to sacrifice a little bit to make that happen. But that's a suggestion if you want to like physically, engage with your groups.
Great. Thanks, Sally. Do you have a question?
Yes, I have a couple. I was wondering how
Mhm.
much time we have to get through. But first one we'll go with, could you possibly share how your insider-outsider positioning has been a benefit and a challenge?
Sure. Um, Insider, I think you kind of get really close to your population, and sometimes that point of being objective can be blurred a little bit. Um, you know, it's sometimes a challenge to remain objective in certain instances, because you do want to help as many people as you can, or help everyone, and that's not always possible. From an outsider, I think for me it's more of a challenge when hmm, I'm not, I think there's a perception that because I'm Black and I do deal with Black women, that you're always received. But sometimes they could perceive you as an outsider, because maybe, you're a professor, or, you're the clinician. There can be some distances with education level or income level, and some people may not welcome you. So I've experienced being an outsider within my own community too. And so that's a challenge, and it's probably more of a blow to my ego. But than anything, because I pride myself on being able to kind of get along with and show people that I'm genuine, regardless of status. So I hope that gives you some insight about how I've dealt with kind of that insider outsider.
Thank you. Are you okay with one more question? We're pretty much at time, but people have great questions.
Yeah, I can take one more.
Okay, so this will be our last question. This is from Jessica. Thank you very much for the presentation. How can these methods be applied in a short-term study project where there may not be a long-term relationship between the researcher and community?
Wow, great point. Your projects may be short term, but many times you have an idea that you want to engage with certain populations or communities. So the relationship building doesn't have to be short term. You could start relationship building, you know, prior to you wanting to engage in the study. So, I mean, if it's something that you just come up with, you know, in one day and you get funding a couple weeks down the line, and it's just so quick that you have to hurry to get your population, et cetera. But usually, in my experience, that doesn't typically happen, because you usually have to get a letter of support for individuals, or you have to indicate or in some kind of way that you have a partnership with communities before, like a funder or someone will even give you money to do that. So yeah, if it's a quick turnaround where you can't necessarily linger and you have to collect the data really quickly, I get that part. But I feel like if you're even interested in this population, and you know that you are because you've seen, you know, statistics about it, or you've had some personal encounters that really spark your interest on a certain topic, you can start relationship building um, prior to doing any work. I mean, so that's my recommendation is, if you remotely have any thoughts about doing work with a certain community, then start the relationship building now. And then when you get the money or the grant or need a letter of support, the relationship's already there.
That's great. That's very good advice. So I just want to thank you, Dr. Chandler, for doing this presentation. It was great. And also thank Ali for working with me.
No,
And
thank you
thanks
for
to
having
everyone.
me. Thank you
Thank
for
you for coming.
attending. Thank you.
And there will probably be a few more questions, so Stacy, can we send those over?
Yeah, yes, I can.
Yep.
Yeah, that were really good questions. So really thought provoking. So thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Take care.